now, South Africa is set to host the Group of 20 in 2025. This is the first time the G20 will be held in African soil with the inclusion of the newest G20 member, the AU. Analysts say hosting the event might offer South Africa the opportunity to join forces with the AU on common objectives. Business Day's editor-at-large, Hilary Joffe, joins us now to look into the nation's readiness and what it stands to gain from hosting the G20. Hilary, a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right, Hilary, it's actually been a while since we've hosted the G20. I think the last time was in 2007. Just help us remember what that was like. It was just before the global financial crisis.
It was indeed, and it was at Arabella Golf Estate in Hermanus. Okay. And the fact that you could fit it into a golf estate at that point tells you some of the difference between the G20 then and now. Because then it was the group of 20 finance ministers and central bankers of the world's most financially, systemically important countries that had come out of the Asian crisis. Then, in the midst of the global crisis, it became a leaders' summit, which brought the heads of government of the world together to prevent the global economy and the global financial system falling over. But it is important to remember that it had its roots, and it still is primarily about the global economy and global development now increasingly. It's not it's not a pure political forum like the UN forums and so on, but it has sort of ballooned and grown over the years. So what we are hosting next year is a massive event. I mean, it's the first time on African soil in its current form as the big G20, the leaders G20, and that means you have between 100 and 200 events, including several summits of finance ministers, of foreign ministers, of multiple groups. It starts, we take over the chair from the current chair, which is Brazil, in December. And from then it's kind of we have to be all systems go for multiple events which lead up to the Leaders Summit, which is late in the year. This year it's in November, perhaps South Africa's would also be in next November.
If I think back to the World Cup in 2010, we know how to throw a party. We know how to host big. But of course, this is, high security, lots of logistics. It tells me that the roads need to work, the infrastructure needs to work in a certain way in order for all these heads of states and all these leaders to move seamlessly. Hilary, I think we've got quite a bit maybe to get going until before then.
I think there are two things to look at. The first is the logistics. Yeah. And the World Cup we hosted amazingly, but it's a 1 month event. Yeah. This is a 1 year event. Sure. And it does culminate in this Leaders Summit, which is logistically complicated, and can you imagine by November next year, politically and geopolitically complicated. So, will the US president come, and will it be Kamala Harris or will it be Donald Trump? Will China's Xi come? Will they talk to each other when they get here? What about Putin? What about all the other fractures in the world? And that's the Leaders Summit, which is the biggest and most high-profile event. But there's some pretty high-profile events leading up to that. And yeah, as I say, it's multiple events which need to be organized. And I imagine we'll use Joburg and Cape Town and perhaps a couple of other cities. So the logistics are pretty complicated. And then the geopolitics and the agenda are pretty complicated too. And as the president of the G20 or any of these global forums, it's up to you to, number one, shape the agenda, and number two, be the show the statecraft. Sure. To mediate between these kind of increasingly conflicting parties, because I think global geopolitics are tense, and we're part of some of it, as we know, but, do we have a view on what's going on in terms of the South China Sea, for example? Those tensions, that too will be coming to our shores. So we need to show the statecraft, but we also need to shape the agenda. Now, there's already a load on the G20 agenda, so each presidency only gets to add some at the margin. But you do want to put your imprint on it, and especially as an African G20. As you said, we will want to work with AU. We will want to put some sort of African agenda, whatever that means, whether it's low-income debt, whether it's whatever issues are important to us as the African continent.
Of course, you make mention of this very tightrope that we need to settle as South Africa. And of course, what happens now and between now and then really matters for us. Our reputation for being able to saddle the tightrope. I'm keen to get your thoughts on that, and whether actually we actually possibly can with as much of the tension that we've been in the middle of, we'll be okay.
Look, I think given the question marks over South Africa's foreign policy and its sometimes pretty clumsy handling of our role in the world, this is an opportunity for a reset. It is much more of a, especially after we got very closely identified with the BRICS, we're now fighting about AGOA. I think this is a real opportunity to reset ourselves, A, as showing some statecraft, and B, as being genuinely non-aligned and genuinely able to mediate in some of the conflicts that are going on in the world, at least during the next year in which we're going to be leading the G20.
And I think that will shape the mood quite a bit, I guess, in 2025. Is what happens in the US, and depending whether we have a Kamala Harris president or a Donald Trump presidency, I'm keen just to get your thoughts on how that could, affect the mood, the direction, and even our stance as we host a G20.
Look, I think it affects the G20 because Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are no friend of multilateral forums and institutions. Quite apart from their views on China and so on, and the fractures that is creating in the world. So it's very material who's going to be the American president by November next year. In fact, for the whole of next year, in terms, I presume, of America's whole attitude to the G20, not to mention the IMF and all the other multilateral forums in which which provide a forum in which world leaders and their deputies can meet. And those are important forums. And I imagine the sidelines chats are, as always, more important than the formal events.
Sounds like a lot still needs to happen, Hilary. I know we'll be speaking to you throughout all of it. Thank you so much for your time. That was Hilary Joffe, Editor-at-Large for The Business Day.